What's up, Yang Gang? We wanted to bring you the footage of that we took in the house the other night that we couldn't get the Wi-Fi. We asked if we could get the password, and apparently NBC had already beat us to it. So, I mean, sometimes we just can't compete, Yang Gang. We hope that you enjoy this video. Shout outs to Ajit, Kumar, and Anthony.
Yep.
We have
new patrons.
Shout outs to y'all. We appreciate you.
So y'all enjoy this video. Very interesting Q&A at the end.
I'm a Yang Gang. He's over here yanging people. We've been yanging people since we got here, y'all. This is for all Democrats. This ain't just for the Yang Gang. So this event is put on by Bedford Democratic Party. Oh, look at that. There he is.
Right there. Right there.
Hello everyone, I'm here for real this time.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Shana Potman. I'm the chair of the Bedford Dems. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you, Andrew, for being here. I had a whole thing written up, but really just the back of your book, really concise right here. Andrew has been the CEO, co-founder, or executive of a number of technology and education companies, and in early 2018 he announced his candidacy for president in 2020. Yang founded Eventual for America, a nonprofit that places top college graduates in startups in emerging U.S. cities to generate job growth and train the next generation of entrepreneurs. This is, Venture for America is just a very impressive thing to read about. So without further ado, I introduce to you Andrew Yang.
Let's go, Andrew.
I also want to thank our host for tonight, where Sue, right? Sue? Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. It takes a very special person to open their home to dozens, in this case, maybe even 100 or so members of the community. I feel also kind of something standing on your carpet with my shoes. I'm Asian, so I tend to take my shoes off. I went to high school here in New Hampshire. How many of you? Yes, I went to Phillips Exeter Academy, graduated in '92. Anyone here go there? Oh yeah, actually, there's a picture of me my senior year. I'm sorry, I'm completely embarrassed. I made a t-shirt out of it, but now it's my wife's favorite t-shirt. She wears it around the house. She shows my boys. She's like, guess who this is? And they're like, Daddy? So I graduated from Phillips Exeter in '92. They actually had me back to speak a number of months ago. And I said when I got there, I said I hadn't been back since I graduated because I didn't really have a good time here. And then the student body erupted in applause, and I was like, oh, that wasn't my intended reaction. So after I graduated from Exeter, I went to Brown University, not that far from here. Anyone here do that? Yes. Or two. Yes, always someone. Studied economics and political science, didn't know what to do, so I went to law school in New York City. Didn't know what to do after that, so I became an unhappy lawyer for 5 whole months. And after I left to start a business. How many of you have started a business or organization or club or a mailing list? You want to raise your hand? So if you started something, you know 2 things. 1, it's a lot harder than anyone lets on. And 2, when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say?
Great.
Great. Everything's always going great. So my business went great until it failed. It had its mini rise and maximum fall. My parents told people I was still a lawyer because that was like a better, easier thing to say. But I've been bitten by the bug, and I said, okay, I want to try and get better at this, trying to build a business. So I worked at a series of small growth companies, eventually became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States and was bought by a public company in 2009. Now, 2009 was a tough time in a lot of the country. How was it here in this part of New Hampshire?
Tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bad everywhere. And I thought I had some insight as to why things had gone so wrong in the country. So that all of the wannabe whiz kids from Exeter, Brown, and Columbia I'd gone to school with, a lot of them had gone to Wall Street. Some of them had even created the derivatives and exotic financial instruments that had helped crash the economy. So I thought, okay, that's a train wreck. We can't have more of that. So what's an alternative? And at this point, I'd gained so much from entrepreneurship, and I thought, well, we should try and give more young people a path towards building businesses and creating jobs in communities around the country. And a joke I used to tell, but it was true. If you had a smart, somewhat directionless recent college graduate, and they said to their parents, I want to go to law school, like I did, the parents would say, that's a great idea, it's easy to find, and the government would give them $100,000 in loans, no questions asked. If the same young person came back to their parents and said, I want to start a business, the parents would say, that's a terrible idea, it's very hard to find, and no one will give them a $100,000 loan. So we have this massive oversupply of indebted law school grads and an undersupply of entrepreneurs and people starting businesses around the country. So I started this organization, Venture for America, that Shannon mentioned. I donated some money to start it, and then I started calling friends with this question: do you love America? And the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to this question? And I said, at least $10,000. So 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, oh, I thought you did. So we launched with a couple $100,000. It grew to the millions, helped create several thousand jobs. And the jobs were not in New York or San Francisco. They were in Providence, Rhode Island, Detroit, Michigan, Cleveland, Ohio, St. Louis, Missouri, and places around the country that were not natively receiving a ton of college graduates. So I did that work for 7 years, helped create several thousand jobs, was honored by the Obama administration. Got to bring my wife to meet the president several times. So my in-laws were like, yeah, you did all right. About a week. And then they came back. Anyway. So I was Mr. Entrepreneurship for that 7 years, but I had this sinking feeling that all the work I was doing was like pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom, where for every job my organization was helping me create, we were losing tens or hundreds of jobs. And then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. And if you were in this room, you probably were not happy about that outcome. How did you all react when that happened? Tears, shock,
disbelief.
Disbelief is the right. Like I was in full stop. Tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided that things were so dark that they wanted to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star. And this, in many ways, was what I'd experienced doing this work with Venture for America over these 7 years, where when you go between Michigan and Manhattan, or St. Louis and San Francisco, how many of you are actually from the Midwest? The South? New England? West Coast? So I grew up in upstate New York, and then I obviously went to high school here in New Hampshire and then college in New England. So I'm like someone who grew up in New England. I had never been to St. Louis or Birmingham or these places I was working, and I was shocked by the disparities in economic dynamism between some of these regions and some of the places that I'd lived and worked before. And so when Donald Trump won, and I felt like I had a front row seat to that too somehow, I started digging into the numbers. If you turn on cable news today, why would you think Donald Trump won in 2016?
Fox News.
Racism.
Russia.
Like Fox News and Information, Facebook, racism, the FBI, Hillary Clinton, emails, all sort of mixed together in a stew. Electoral college. Yeah, electoral college.
That's the best.
But the numbers tell a very clear and distinct story, where there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation in a voting area and the movement towards Trump in that area. We automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa. All that list of states sounds familiar. Those are the states that Donald Trump needed to win, and he won all of them. You all lost 30,000 manufacturing jobs here in New Hampshire, though it was a little bit earlier in time, and a lot of it was in the northern part of the state. But if you drive through some of the northern towns in the state, you still see the aftermath. And when those factories close, blue goes to red. A state like Ohio, where I'm going to be in the debate next week, traditional bellwether state, Trump won by 8 points. Like, why is that? because they lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs in Ohio alone, and then all of those towns went to Trump. So this was the explanation of the numbers that I found. What was your name, sir?
Richard.
Richard. So when Richard said disbelief, I had the same reaction. I said, okay. Like, I can't go around, like, resting on my laurels, like, oh, how did you do it, Andrew? It's like, oh my gosh, like, my work is like a drop in the bucket compared to what's happening. So I started digging into the trends. We got rid of these 4 million manufacturing jobs. It was not immigrants. It was because of technology and automation. And when you go to a factory in the Midwest, you see it. It's not a bunch of immigrants doing these jobs. It's a bunch of robot arms and machines. And what's happened in those parts of the economy is now ripping through other parts. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing?
Amazon.
Amazon. That's one word answer is Amazon. Amazon's opening up $20 billion in business every year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That is the math. 20 billion out, zero back. 30% of stores and malls closed. Most common job in most of the country is working as a retail clerk. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. What does she do when her store closes? It's unclear. Sort of a rhetorical question. When you call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software or bot, you probably do the same thing I do, which is you dial 000, human, try to get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if you do that. Right? You're like, oh, please, get someone on the line. Then you breathe a sigh of relief when the human shows up. In 2 or 3 years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be quick, delightful, seamless. You might not even realize it's software. But what is that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work at call centers right now making $14 an hour? My friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. And the reason they're working so hard on this problem is that the cost savings from automating away truck driving are estimated to be $168 billion a year. Think about that number. That's enough to justify hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. And they tell me they're 98% of the way there. There are robot trucks on the highway right now in Arizona, and UPS just invested. They're already on the highways. Now, the reason they're testing them in Arizona is that these robot trucks are really bad with something called snow. Because they have sensors that are trying to pick up road markings, and then if the snow covers the markings, then the computer's not sure what to do. And you can't have semi-trucks smashing into things at a 2% rate. You're like, oh, well, we got 98% of it. So how do they think they can get the last 2%? You remember the first time you saw video on your phone? You're like, oh, we can do that now? So that's 3G. We're now rolling out 5G around the country. And the way they want to get the last 2% is they want to equip the trucks with teleoperating software and equipment so that if the computer's not sure what to do because of bad weather, it alerts a teleoperator in a warehouse in Nevada or Arizona who will then beam into the truck and then drive it like a video game because they have cameras in the front. They can just like see it like they're in the cab. And then when the computer's confident again, then the person beams back out. What do you think the ratio will be between teleoperators in Nevada or Arizona and the 3.5 million Americans who drive a truck for a living, or the 7 million Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that need the trucker to get out and have a meal every day? What do you think that ratio is? 2%, 3%, 4%. To be clear, there will still be truck drivers, but they'll be getting into the robot truck 10 miles outside of the urban area and then just driving the last 10 miles, where you're going to get rid of a lot of the miles in between. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country. Manufacturing has been borne the brunt of it recently, but now it's ripping through retail, call centers, transportation, fast food, and on through the economy. Donald Trump is not the cause of these problems. He's a symptom. He's a manifestation. And unfortunately, they're just going to get worse in the days to come. We're in the midst of this incredible winner-take-all economy where the gains are getting collected in the hands of fewer and fewer of us. So when I realized all this, when I went through the numbers, I had my slide deck and my book, all this stuff. I went to Washington, D.C. My first move was not to run for president. You know, I'm not crazy. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I asked some of the leaders there, I said, all right, Fourth Industrial Revolution, America does not understand what's happening to it. We're scapegoating immigrants. Immigrants have very little to do with this by the numbers. What is the plan? What are we going to do? And what do you think the folks in Washington, D.C. said to me when I asked, what are we going to do? The 3 big answers I got were, number 1, we cannot talk about that. Number 2, we should study that further. And number 3, the most common was we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. Very reasonable, very responsible. And then I said, look, I took a look at the studies. Do you all want to guess how effective government-funded retraining programs were for manufacturing workers in the Midwest who lost their jobs?
0 to 13%.
0 to 15%. That's right.
Wow. It's a plant.
They're a total. You can tell by the T-shirt, right? So thank you. 0 to 15%. They're a total failure. If you dig at the numbers, half of the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs left the workforce and never worked again. And of that group, half filed for disability. You then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities to the point where now both of those causes of death have overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in American history. It has gotten so bad that our overall life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row, almost unheard of in a developed country. You know the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row?
Civil War. Civil War.
The Spanish flu of 1918. Global pandemic. You have to go to a pandemic that killed millions to get to a point where America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row. So retraining doesn't work. And so when I said this to the folks in DC, you know what they said to me next? I guess we'll get better at it. And one person in DC said something that brought me here to you tonight. He said, Andrew, no one here in DC is going to do anything about the set of problems. Because this is not a town of leaders, this is a town of followers. And the only way we will do something about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring it crashing down on our heads. Only way. And I thank God that I had someone with me, because you would think I was making that up, right? That sounds like a movie supervillain speech. The fact is, it was a DC lobbyist speech. Turns out they're very similar. But he did me a favor. He was right. And I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back with the wave. And that's why I'm here with you tonight. I'm standing before you now, either 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls. My campaign raised $10 million in the last quarter alone. So the wave is starting. And you all, some of you are very politically savvy, so some of you know this, but you all are among the most powerful people in our country today. Do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? Approximately 1,000. So say there are 80 of us here in this room today, that's like 80,000 Californians. That's like 2 football stadiums full of Californians. That's this room. You all have the power to send a country in a new direction next year. The question is, what are you going to do with that power? What vision can we present to the rest of the country to actually move us forward? If you're here tonight, you heard something like this about my campaign. There's an Asian guy running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Y'all remember that? Yeah. And the first time you heard that, you thought it was a gimmick, a joke, too good to be true, will never happen. But this is not my idea at all. This is a deeply American idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. He called it a citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King championed it in 1967, and it is what he was fighting for when he was assassinated in 1968. Called it the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. It was so mainstream that 1,000 economists endorsed it in the 60s, and it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. It's called the Family Assistance Plan. Came this close to being law. The reason it didn't become law was that Democrats in the Senate wanted an even higher income threshold. And I talked to someone who worked in Democratic politics at that time. He's a little bit older now, and he said that was the biggest mistake we ever made. It was just taking that deal, and then Americans would have been guaranteed an income of, in today's dollars, it's something like $24,000 a year, like from 1971 till now. 11 years later, one state actually did pass a dividend, where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that?
Alaska.
And how do they pay for it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology.
Technology, software, self-driving cars and trucks, big data. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that study? Or that documentary on Netflix? It's true, our data is now worth more than oil. Raise your hand if you remember getting your data check in the mail. Where did the data check go? Did it get lost?
Amazon.
It went to Amazon, Facebook, Google, and the other mega tech companies. Again, you have a $1 trillion tech company like Amazon that literally paid 0 in taxes last year, less than everyone here. How is that possible? How could a $1 trillion tech company pay 0 in taxes? Oh,
Loopholes.
So what they, I can go through it's not even that complicated. So what they do is, first, they have a multinational business, so they push their revenues to Ireland and other tax havens. And Ireland knows this, so they lower their corporate tax rate to something much lower than ours. Number two, they invest in all these new businesses, and anytime it looks like they might make money, they just buy something or start plowing money into some new line of work. The third thing is they compensate their executives through all these stock options and stock bonus pools that actually count as expenses that reduce their profitability. So it's not unusual for them to pay zero in taxes. They do it all the time. You look at the lifetime of Amazon, they pay zero in taxes most years. So whose fault is it that they're paying zero in taxes? Is it their fault? No, it's our fault. You have to say, it's their job to try and pay zero in taxes. It's our job not to let them, New Hampshire. It is your job. So your job is to give every American a tiny, tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. If we do this, we will generate hundreds of billions in new revenue immediately, enough to fund a $1,000 dividend for everyone here in this state and around the country. Particularly because if you got a dividend of $1,000 a month, how would you spend it in real life? College, sure. Groceries, rent, gas, credit union, daycare expenses,
Go to the movies.
night out, Democratic Party dues. How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire?
Most of it.
Most all of it. A little bit of it would float up to the cloud. You buy an extra appliance on Amazon and upgrade your Netflix subscription. But most of it would stay right here in New Hampshire. It would create over 12,000 jobs right here in the state. It would have a lot of these Main Street stores that right now are on the verge of closing. We'd keep them open. And then the mechanic and the tutor and the Little League all have to hire an extra hand or a set of hands or two because there's more vitality flowing through our Main Street economy every single day. This is the trickle-up economy, from our people, our families, and our communities up. And in a country where 78% of us are living paycheck to paycheck, you know most of it's going to get spent. The money circulates over and over again. It ends up generating hundreds of billions in new revenue on top of the money we're getting from the tech companies. It saves us billions on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare. It was here in New Hampshire that a corrections officer said this to me. He said, we should pay people to stay out of jail because we spend so much when they're in jail. Yeah. This is a corrections officer. Now, he was retiring, so he can say this now. But he was right. We think we're being smart by not investing in people, and then we end up spending more in much more destructive and punitive ways down the line. How many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? It's ridiculous. You laugh. It doesn't make any sense. GDP's at record highs right now, also at record highs in the United States. Stress levels, financial insecurity, student loan debt, suicides, drug overdoses, all at record or near record highs. So if you have these measurements that are leading you towards literally being stressed out and dying at earlier ages, are the measurements wrong? Or are we somehow doing something wrong? It's clear the measurements are wrong. And even the inventor of GDP said this 100 years ago. He said, this is a terrible measurement for national well-being. We should never use it as that. So if GDP is sort of a ridiculous measurement for how your community is doing, what would actually get you excited if I said this got better in your town?
Education.
Yes. Did you say educational?
Education.
So childhood success rates in education, yes. Income and affordability, yes. Clean air, clean water, that would make you very happy. Good thought? Yeah, how about mental health and freedom from substance abuse? Like how well our people are doing. How about health and life expectancy? So we have measurements for all of these things, and we need to upgrade and update GDP for the 21st century, because robot trucks, as one example, will be tremendous for GDP. They will be terrible for many, many Americans. Raise your hand again if you've run a business or organization. Imagine having the wrong measurements for your organization. How's that organization going to do over time? That's where we are right now as a country. What are the 3 headline measurements that we use for our economic progress? GDP, headline unemployment, and stock market growth, right? So GDP we've talked a little bit about, and the illustration I use that's the most personal, my wife is at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. What is her work figured in at in GDP every day?
0.
0. And we know that's nonsense. We know her work is among the most challenging and vital that there is. So GDP, totally out of date, needs a massive upgrade. And it sounds complicated, but I'm happy to say it's not. As your president, it will be very easy for me to go down the street to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, great news, GDP, 100 years old, needs an update. We're going to update it to the American scorecard that includes our health and childhood success levels and environmental quality and mental health. And then I will report it back to you every year at the State of the Union. I'll have a PowerPoint deck at the State of the Union and say, here's how we're doing. So that's GDP. Headline unemployment. We've probably seen the headlines is near a record low, so we must be doing great, right? Do you remember candidate Trump when he was running for office? What did he say about unemployment? Fake news, 10 million Americans out, this number's garbage. And then he becomes president, all of a sudden you don't hear any of that. He's like, oh, now the number works. He was right the first time as a candidate. The headline unemployment rate ignores people dropping out of the workforce. Right now, our labor force participation rate is down to 63%, close to a multi-decade low at the same levels as Costa Rica and El Salvador, to give you some international comparables. There's a lot of weakness. It does not include the fact that 94% of new jobs are temp, gig, or contract jobs that don't have healthcare benefits and often don't have a meaningful path forward. And it doesn't include the fact that 40 to 44% of recent college graduates are doing a job that doesn't require a degree. There are all of these weaknesses in the labor market as soon as you flip the rock over. Almost half of Americans can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. Also doesn't show up in headline unemployment. And then stock market prices. The top 20% of Americans own 92% of stock market wealth. Bottom 50% own essentially zero. Bottom 80% own about 8%. So you're essentially cheerleading something that corresponds to the fortunes of the top 20% of Americans. So this is our organization, so to speak. This is our society. This is our country. And we're cheerleading these three measurements and saying everything's great, everything's great. But Americans know things are not great. It's one reason why Donald Trump won in 2016. So what we need actual numbers that correspond to how we're doing. And then you would see that our numbers are actually really not doing well at all. Like if you look at things like our life expectancy or our mental health or childhood success rates, they're actually all trending downwards and going in the wrong direction very quickly. So the vision that we need to take to the rest of the country is of a human-centered economy that actually works for us in the 21st century with the right measurements that corresponds to how we're doing. Because if we all stay slaves to the notion that economic value and human value are the same things, that if we are to have any value, we have to maintain competitiveness against the machines and the robots and the software and all that stuff, we're going to lose on an epic scale. Now, it doesn't matter if the truck driver was conscientious or not, the robot truck's still going to zoom past him on the road. It doesn't matter if the radiologist studied extra after they left their fellowship, the artificial intelligence can see shades of gray that the human eye cannot. Like the meritocracy now is breaking down in unprecedented ways, and we have to evolve and wake our fellow Americans up. So this is the vision of an economy that actually works for you all, works for us. Now this is a very nice part of New Hampshire, but there are parts of New Hampshire where the next generation, younger people, feel like they have to leave town or even the state to have the kind of opportunities that they want. And that's part of this too. The winner-take-all economy is converging the opportunities and capital in places like Boston, places like New York. It's sucking rural areas progressively dry. It's one reason why the rural-urban divide is now at unprecedented levels. So the trickle-up economy actually moves the needle more for rural areas and starts to balance things out. So this is the vision, and hopefully now, what sounded originally when you first heard about the campaign, it's like, wow, that's unrealistic. Now it sounds like it's necessary. It's necessary and it's inevitable. And the sooner we do it, the better off we'll be. The better off our society will be. So I said before that I'm 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls. What's the number one criteria that Democrats have for the eventual nominee?
Beat Trump.
Beat Donald Trump. That's right. That is the right criterion. I am one of only 2 candidates in the field that 10% of Donald Trump voters say they will support in the general election, which means if I'm the nominee, we win the whole thing in 2020. That's just the math. I'm attracting not just Democrats and progressives, but also independents, libertarians, and disaffected Trump voters who feel like they got it wrong the last time. We're building a much more diverse and broad coalition than many of the other Democrats in the field. Donald Trump's our president today in part because he got some of the problems right. He said, he was going to make America great again, and what did Hillary say in response in 2016? America's already great. Remember that? And unfortunately, that was not the right response. We have to acknowledge the depth and severity of the problems that many Americans are feeling. But though we got some of the problems right, Donald Trump's solutions were the opposite of what we need. His solutions were, we're going to build a wall, we're going to turn the clock back, we're going to bring the old jobs back. We have to do the opposite of all of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and work and value. And I am the ideal candidate for that job, New Hampshire, because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. What does math stand for?
Make America think harder.
Make America think harder. That's right. That's what we're going to do. We're going to let America know it's not left, it's not right, it's forward. And that is where we need you all to take the country in 2020. So thank you all. I'd love to take some questions. Yes. Not a plant. I don't know what she's going to say.
All right, so on abortion, I've seen your policy website, and you have like solid Democratic pro-choice view, but I've been sort of looking for more than that, looking for what the numbers guy would interpret on that question, what, the not left, not right, forward, interpretation would be, because we've been arguing Roe v. Wade for 46 years. I can't think of another Supreme Court decision that we've been, kind of getting stuck on. Yeah. So I was wondering what you might think of these changes which an executive would have the power to do. One is, would you consider ordering the National Institute of Health to get working on the male birth control pill, which is in progress, but they're not finishing it. So, and another is, what would you think of something more like a national sex ed curriculum? It's all different school to school, state by state. Yeah, I mean, in Texas, what they teach there it's a joke, but
they're teaching some interesting.
But it's also dangerous because it's taking power away. So, I don't know, where would you take that?
I love the question. To me, women's reproductive rights are fundamental human rights, and to me, it's been the decided law of the land for a long time. It's terrible that they're peeling it back in certain parts of the country. So to protect it at a national level, I would be looking to codify Roe v. Wade into law, and I would be open to examining how many Supreme Court justices there are, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says it has to be 9 justices. It's been 5, it's been 13. So we can shift that number if it's necessary to protect women's reproductive rights. When you talk about some of those policies, the first time I've been asked, I am so for a male birth control pill. And that would be tremendous. Why is it always on the women that have women's reproductive rights? And I think this should be something that guys have no problem with, because to me it's like, if you were a guy and there was some way you could also participate in this decision, I think that'd be very positive. So yeah, 100% yes to that. The national education curriculum, it's interesting. I 100% agree with you that we need to be pushing science out to schools around the country, and that we're doing people a disservice if we're ignoring some of the basic facts around reproduction. At the same time, I do think it's heavy-handed for the government to go into communities and say, hey, you need to teach this in this way, because in many cases, education school boards, have local sensibilities in mind, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that many communities might find that to be an intrusion of the government at that level. So I'd stop short of that, but I would look for many other ways that we can make women's reproductive rights very clear and available. And a lot of it's about resources. So we have to put the resource in place so that if a woman wants to have an abortion, we talk about that there are facilities that she can get to straightforwardly, not have to go across state lines to do so.
Right? Yeah, very good. I'm not a plant. Would your universal income of X number of dollars a month for all Americans, would that be irregardless of income level? If I was making $1 million a year, would I still get $1,000 a month from the government?
Yes, it would be regardless of your income level. So if you're making $1 million a year, you would get another $1,000 a month. And there are a number of reasons for this. Number one is, if you look at Alaska's experience, they've been giving the dividend to everyone from the richest Alaskan, I have no idea who that is, I should look it up sometime, the richest Alaskan to the poorest Alaskan. And this has many positive effects. Number one is there's no stigma attached to it. There's no rich to poor transfer. There's no you're getting it, I'm not. It's universally popular as a result. And there's no incentive to underreport your income below a certain level. There's no like, oh, maybe, like if my wife, maybe we'll say you're over there and I'm over here. Like all that stuff goes out the window. And then the administration becomes very lightweight. And it's so popular in Alaska that a majority of Alaskans said they would accept higher taxes to fund it. They love it so much. And if you, I don't know how many Alaskans you know, but that's like a highly unusual, for them to be pro-tax. It's to the test of time. It's been in effect now for almost 40 years. So that's one reason why I think it should be universal. The second reason is that if we're harnessing the gains from the big winners of the 21st century economy, you take someone like Jeff Bezos, we're going to get billions of dollars from Jeff. And so then if we try and send him $1,000 a month to remind him he's an American, then it's fine. So I think the universality has many benefits that outweigh the possible drawbacks in terms of monitoring administration and the politicization of it. Yes?
Hi. So if every American received $1,000 a month, how could we prevent like landlords from just raising the price of rent because they know, okay, you will have at least this much money, we're going to raise rent?
Now I know that's an issue here in New Hampshire in particular. So there are three core sources of inflation for us. Unfortunately, they're the ones that make us the most miserable. Number one is housing. Number two is healthcare. Number three is education. Everything else has actually been more or less stable or increasing in quality. So I'm talking about electronics, clothing, media, food, cars, like all of those things are either getting better or cheaper. So then if you look at something like housing, if you're getting $1,000 a month and it's portable, and I'm the landlord, I'm like, ooh, I'm going to stick it to you and like increase your rent. It's actually harder to stick it to you systematically because now you have this passive income that goes with you wherever you want. And so if I stuck it to you too badly, you'd be like, wait a minute, like let me get 3 of my friends together. Together we're getting $4,000 a month. Why don't we try and get that fixer-upper and then try and move into it? And the income's independent of your location. Because right now a lot of the landlords are sticking it to you because they're like, you have to live here in order to access certain jobs and opportunities. In New Hampshire, though, the problem's more fundamental than that. It's that the housing supply isn't what it needs to be, particularly for young people in affordable housing. And so we have to try and increase the incentives for the development of accessible housing here and around the country, because right now the incentives are all to try and make these like fancier developments that make more money. And so then when it comes to affordable housing, the incentives aren't there. And I hate to say it, but communities also tend to not want affordable housing options in their neighborhoods because it seems going to drag down the property value. That's like the NIMBYism issue. And so we have to try and align those incentives. But I'm happy to say that the research that's been done says that it's actually going to be much harder to push around tenants and consumers if you have this income. It's harder to exploit, not easier. Yes?
What's your plan for addressing the national debt and ever-growing national deficit?
So I've run businesses before, and if you have a balance sheet problem, you look at two things, revenue and expenses. Makes sense, right? To me, the main thing is we have this revenue problem. I talked before about how we're going to save $168 billion from robot trucks in the next 10 years, per year. Staggering amount of money. Right now, how much of that $168 billion would the public see? Next to nothing. Because where it would go would be the profit lines of these mega tech companies, which you know are not going to pay a lot of taxes, or it's going to be these startups that are going to go up in value, but they're going to be in the private market. They're not going to have any liquidity event. They'll have no tax to pay for a long time. So right now, the problem is that the value is getting sucked up and out, and that's hurting our ability to manage our debt. So if you put a mechanism in place where we were getting even a tiny slice of that $168 billion a year just in that one industry and then these other industries, like the AI that's going to do the call center jobs, we can generate conservatively almost $1 trillion in new revenue, which then helps us get our debt under control. The second thing, and this is funny coming from like the $1,000 a month for everyone guy, but we have an expense problem in this country. We're spending a ton of money on programs that are just getting more and more expensive. One obvious expense line is that we're spending $750 billion or so that we know on the military-industrial complex, and a lot of that's not making us any safer. So one move we should make is try and take some of that $750 billion and move it towards infrastructure, which has higher economic returns, still creates a lot of the same jobs in districts around the country, but then you get higher economic returns. Over time, and this is a tough conversation, but over time there are a lot of things the government can do that should be able to bring the expenses down with the use of technology. It's a hard thing because you don't want to say, it's like, hey, you have like, all these, and there are other parts of government that we should hire more for. As an example, the U.S. Forest Service, we're properly maintaining maybe 10% of our forest. It's one reason why you have these massive wildfires in the West Coast, because climate change has now made those forests drier and more prone to fires, so you need to hire in that space. But there are parts of the government that you can scale back on and probably save money. I'm confident the bigger problem between the revenue and expense problem is actually the revenue problem. That if you get a mechanism in place where we enjoy the gains of the 21st century economy, we can actually get our deficit under control. The biggest lie in America today is that we don't have the money. This is the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. We're up to almost $21 trillion in GDP, up almost $6 trillion in the last 14 years. We have unbelievable amounts of money. It's just not going to us. It's going to the winner take all, like this handful of people. I personally know some of these people. And the good among them, if you say, hey, are you automating away the jobs? They'll be like, oh yeah, I am. Right. And then you say, how do you feel about it? They'll say, not great. And then I'll say, do you want to do something about it? And then some of them will step up and say yes. Others don't care. Others are not very nice people. But at least some of them are like, I am in. So I've been endorsed by Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, Sam Altman, Alexis Ohanian, like a bunch of the titans of tech, because they actually see what's coming and they know what I know, which is that an environment where people don't feel like they're included in progress is a terrible environment for progress and innovation. They know that it's only a matter of time before the pendulum swings the other way. And some of them are really good moral human beings. Again, not all. Yes, in the back, sir.
Okay, Andrew. First of all, thank you for writing a very good book. I'm almost done with it. I'm a big data guy myself. I want to know, as president, what are you going to do to help part of our report card to report our infrastructure? And I mean things we don't see, like pipes or inspection results of bridges. My dad's a civil engineer. Before he retired, he'd inspect a lot of bridges. It's like, don't fly over that bridge.
I'm with most people in this room that it is so negligent what we've allowed to happen to our infrastructure. I think last I checked we're like a D+ or something along those lines. And it's water pipes, it's bridges, it's roads, it's schools, it's broadband access in rural areas. There are so many things that we could do better. We're coasting on the investment of decades ago, and now it's literally crumbling underneath our feet. So this is something we have to address, but it is an opportunity. That if we invest in the right ways, we can create many, many infrastructure jobs. I was in another part of New Hampshire, and there was an entrepreneur, Ned Reynolds, who started a business that now has several hundred employees, and they're installing solar panels. Like, that's the kind of infrastructure move that creates jobs and helps move us towards a more sustainable economy. But we could get that D- or D+ or whatever it is up to like a reasonable grade. It's a massive opportunity if we do it right. I would bet like the infrastructure deficit, I believe, is around $4 trillion. And this is one thing I can't believe that Donald Trump didn't get right. Am I right? Yeah. He didn't even build anything. Isn't that his entire thing? I was even willing to accept Trump Bridge and Trump this and Trump that just to get the bridges built.
It's not Trump wall.
He's all focused on Trump wall.
No Trump wall.
Yeah,
Don't agree with
the non-existent Trump wall.
Right, he's not going to.
Yeah. So he just left us more to do, but we need to rebuild our infrastructure as quickly as possible. Yes.
Hi. I'm torn between asking you about the climate change problem and healthcare, so I don't know.
We'll be democratic.
I'll take help.
Both.
I was going to do a show of hands. How many of you are in for climate change? We'll start there. So how many of you watched the Democratic debate in Detroit, where I staked out the new third position in American politics on climate change? Remember this?
Thank you.
Position number one was we need to fight climate change. Position number two is climate change is a hoax. And the new position number three is it's worse than you think. I'm in the worse than you think camp. The last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in history. July is the warmest month in history. Greenland just reported that its ice pack is melting at the rate projected in 2070 now, 51 years earlier. And in other parts of New Hampshire, they're already experiencing regular coastal flooding in hundreds of structures. There was one estimate that said we'd have to relocate 13 million Americans over the coming years because of rising sea levels. And if you think that's far out, we've already done that for a town in Louisiana where their island became uninhabitable and then we had to move them. So this is a situation where you have to do everything on the table in my mind. So we need to move towards sustainable source of energy by taking the hundreds of billions we've been funneling to the fossil fuel companies and move them towards solar and wind and renewable sources of energy. The tough part is that we're only 15% of global emissions, and what's happening in the rest of the world is that China is going to Africa and saying, hey, great news, I've got a power plant for you, and it burns coal. What do you think? And then what do the Africans say?
Yeah.
Great, sign us up. And so we have to actually get in there and say, hey, instead of this coal-burning power plant, why don't you use these great solar panels? You get a lot of sun here. And you have to try and make that more appealing to them. So right now we have this Ex-Im Bank that's subsidizing certain exports. We need to massively subsidize renewables and sustainable energy technology to the developing world to try and get the other 85% down. Because even if we got our own act together, if the rest of the world's continuing to pollute, it's going to be impossible. The other thing is, and this is something I feel strongly about, we have to stop pretending that doing less of the bad is going to save us. We have to start doing more of the good. So what does the good mean? It means reforesting tracts of land. We need a lot more trees. You know, now we need to reseed ocean beds and try and make them habitable for various forms of marine life again. The Atlantic Ocean is losing 48% of its biomass every year now. There was a multi-million-dollar shrimp business in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that has gone to zero because of climate change. So these changes are happening now. We have to actually invest in trying to reverse them affirmatively in our environment. It's not just like pollute less, it'll work. It won't. Like we have to actually go out there and try and fix some of these problems. I would propose a constitutional amendment to say we have to safeguard the environment, and that's a core responsibility of the U.S. government. And then, and this is one of the things that I think would do a lot, is if we actually start measuring our economic progress by how we're doing on climate change, then that's a game changer, because right now the problem is people think there's a tension between economic growth and doing right by the planet. Like doing right by the planet is more expensive. It's going to cost jobs. It's going to hurt us. Like, you know, that's the message. And so if you actually change the way economic progress looks, then you can say, wait a minute, like moving in that direction actually like helps us move forward economically, not backwards. It's a Herculean task, but we have no choice. We have to move as quickly as we can. Acknowledging too that even if we did everything right at this point, we have to invest billions and billions in making our communities more resilient, in protecting our people. And $1,000 a month would actually help. And here's how. When you have a natural disaster, who gets hurt the most? Poor people. People who don't have a car to get into to drive to shelter. People who just don't have any economic resources. If you put some money into everyone's hands, then that allows us to protect ourselves and our families from the ravages of climate change. Well, there's a lot. I mean, this was, you said thank you for saying it on the Detroit stage. The reality is very dark. It just is. There's a proverb that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. That's where we are. Should have done this 20 years ago, but it's not 20 years ago, it's today, so we have to act today. That's climate change. Healthcare, I told an Asian doctor joke that I had trouble with. You want to masturbate? You guys hear that? Thank you, I'm glad you thought so. I said I'm Asian, I know a lot of doctors, and some people.
Totally fell flat. I didn't know.
Apparently it hit in living rooms around the country. It wasn't so great on Asian Twitter.
I know a lot.
I love you, Asian Twitter. It's fine. So healthcare. Healthcare right now we're in the worst of all worlds because we're spending all this money to not great results. And the reason is that the system is designed to reward activity and revenue and not healthfulness. And you know this is the case because when, in the case of the Cleveland Clinic, they're paid independent of how many procedures they prescribe, all of a sudden they prescribe fewer procedures. You know, so there's like an incentive problem that if we get right, we can make massive strides on. And that's one reason why the government has to play a massive role. This is not a market where the private market is going to arrive at the right incentives. It's just not. So I'm for Medicare for all that doesn't immediately outlaw private insurance is the plan. The goal has to be to outcompete private insurance, get the prices down and the access up, and create a public option that's independent of your work. Tying your healthcare to work makes no sense at all. It makes it harder to hire people, harder to treat them as a full-time employee with benefits, harder to change jobs, harder to start a business. How many people have thought about doing something and they're like, oh, what am I going to do with my healthcare? Millions of Americans, right? All of us. If you get that weight off of our backs, then there's a lot more dynamism in the economy, a lot more people starting businesses and going out there doing the things that they want to do. So to me, that's the opportunity again. The confusion that Democrats have, in my opinion, is that they get trapped in a cost conversation. When they say, how do you pay for it, how do you pay for it, how do you pay for it? We're already spending 18% of GDP on our healthcare. There's so much waste in the system that we can't help but save money if we get the incentives right and the government does its job well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, miss?
What is your foreign policy vision?
You probably got a sense of it when I talked about the military-industrial complex. We need to end the forever wars. We've been in this constant state of armed conflict for 18 years and counting. And a lot of these conflicts, the American people did not actually vote for in a meaningful way because Congress has ceded the authority to declare war to the executive branch, essentially, and the AUMF. And so we need to put the power to declare war back in Congress where it belongs. We need to be judicious and restrained about sending our troops abroad. The threats that concern me the most in the 21st century are not these state actors. It's climate change, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, drones, loose nuclear material, and non-state actors. It's like the new list of threats. And the goal has to be to try and address those threats before they become existential. So my foreign policy vision is to invest in our alliances and partnerships, let people know we're going to have reliable foreign policy instead of this erratic president we've had. And our foreign policy reflects how we're doing at home. What happened was we fell apart at home, so we voted in Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump now has made a mess of a lot of our historic relationships. We have to rebuild here at home so that other countries regard us as a reliable and steadfast partner. So why has it gotten 2.5 times more expensive? Part of it's that we've cut back state funding. But the bigger part of it is that there's been administrative and bureaucratic growth at these universities to unprecedented levels. They haven't spent the money on faculty. They haven't even spent the money on buildings and facilities, because when you have a building or facility, someone likes to put their name on it and they get some of the money. The problem is really administrative growth. And it set our kids up to just be indebted for years. The average indebtedness now, I think, is around $37,000. The overall student loan debt's up to $1.5 trillion. And that is not a normal number. That number was less than $100 billion 20 years ago. Think about that, went up over the 15-fold. And so now we've stuck it to our young people and said it's somehow your fault. Like, I think that's very messed up. So we have to forgive a significant portion of the student loan debt, let our kids actually have a chance to start careers and buy homes and start families. We need to try and get the cost of college under control by tying government support to the administrator to student ratio, try and get that down to a reasonable level. And then the third thing is giving everyone $1,000 a month at age 18. That helps pay for people's educational pursuits. But one reason I'm passionate about putting the money towards everyone and not just free college is that only 33% of Americans graduate from college. So you're subsidizing the top third of the population. If you include community colleges and those, it's like 42%, but it's still not a majority of Americans. So if you look at our high school level, only 6% of American high school students are in technical, vocational, or apprenticeship tracks. In Germany, that percentage is 59%. Think about that gulf. We need to get Mike Rowe and dirty jobs and just go like, these jobs are awesome, and go around. Because the fact is we're overprescribing college. We're sending a lot of kids to college who is not working out for it, but of course the school doesn't give them a refund. Like, even if they don't finish, never get a refund. A lot of them should not be in college in the first place. And we have millions of unfilled jobs that would require technical or vocational training, but unfortunately those jobs are now being stigmatized, where kids are like, oh, like that's not for me, I should try and go to college. When really those actually would be better opportunities. They're resilient, they're high paying, and many of them I think would just be a better fit in terms of someone's life satisfaction because you can roll up your sleeves and get out there and actually do some things. But yeah, like big emphasis on technical and vocational. We've gone wrong in our education system that way. Yes, Miss?
Yeah, one of the things I know you've talked about is paying teachers more.
Yeah.
And I'm a teacher, and one of the things that I would rather see than me getting more money, because I'm a teacher because I love teaching. So getting a pay raise would be like, yay, this is nice, but it's not going to make me happier about being a teacher. Is having more teachers. Because so often in schools, there's classes are overcrowded, and that leads to stress. So then the teachers who are working because they love teaching are getting overworked, and it's making the good teachers kind of decide they don't want to teach anymore because they're just like too stressed out. So what do you see about that difference between just creating an infrastructure so that there can be more teachers, and so that people don't say, oh, well, I went to college and I didn't do well as a scientist or as a writer. I guess I'll become a teacher because they get paid bad money. Like, that sort of difference.
Oh, congratulations on being a teacher. What level do you teach?
I teach English as a second language at high school.
Oh wow, that's tremendous. You make a big difference. Let's give a round of applause. So the data clearly shows that a good teacher is worth your weight in gold, and that's why we should be paying teachers more. The data also shows that things like student-to-teacher ratio matter, so we should have more teachers. I'm a very numbers-driven person. The problem right now is that teachers are stuck in this argument where they're seen as costs, and then the states are trying to pay you as little as possible that they can get away with. Whereas if we see you as investments and our kids as investments, then it makes sense not just to pay you more, but to get more teachers in the classroom. And as the parent of a special needs kid, I know what a student-teacher ratio can mean. I know it's like a lot of these kids need a lot more individual attention than is realistic in a 30-kid classroom. And these are where the jobs of the future should be if we were to move in the right direction appropriately. One of the things I said in the Houston debate, the data shows very clearly that 2/3 of our kids' academic performance is determined by factors outside of school. So to me, we're being unfair to our teachers because we're saying teach our kids, but you can only control about 1/3 of the outcome. But we're going to hold you 100% responsible. And every teacher knows that there's all this stuff going on outside the classroom that's going to have a bigger impact, like their life at home, parental time and input, the words read to them when they're very young, stress levels in the house, type of neighborhood. Like, these control 2/3 of our kids' academic performance. So if we wanted to, and if you think about it, what's happening in America, we actually spend by international standards a fair amount of money per student in schools. And as usual, like, our institutions are not getting like the right bang for their buck. And so when people try and put more money into these schools, they sometimes are disappointed because the action is actually outside of the school in a lot of these cases. If we put money directly into the homes and families and neighborhoods, then it would give the kids a much better chance to learn and the teachers a better chance to teach. If they actually showed up able to learn. Because sometimes when they don't show up able to learn, there are limited things you can do. Yes, did you ask a question?
I did.
You did? I thought so. Look at that. Let's steal a trap. Yeah.
Yes, hi.
No, that doesn't really rock.
I get this pain in my leg, and the only thing that helps me is Reiki. I've tried everything, trust me. Is Reiki treatment.
I'm not familiar with that, man. Should I be?
Yeah, it's kind of like a massage heel therapy.
Love it.
Kind of
all right.
Okay. None of my insurances cover it. I've seen a lot of it, but it's the only thing that helps. So, would you create a Medicare for all that covers these kinds of aspects?
I 100% would. I mean, you have to find out what works for each patient. I am for holistic medicine. My wife and mother each had various conditions that they found alternative treatments for. It's like acupuncture, it was different things that may or may not have been covered by traditional insurance. And to me, if it works and the patient is benefiting from it, then we should cover it. That is, to me, the right way to frame Medicare for All program, that it's not institutionalized, it's actually more holistic. The other big thing that's been demonstrated in these settings, if you integrate mental health and physical health, you have much better outcomes. Mental health is tied into so many of the conditions that we see. Addiction, depression, obesity and diabetes, like, it's all tied together. So we need to try and integrate mental health to the extent we can. My brother is a psychologist, So it's one reason I'm passionate about it. So you can tell that I'm for treating the whole person, and if that means Reiki, which now I know something about, then I'm all for it. I'm also for legalizing marijuana, which actually when they said Reiki at first I thought it was weed. I was like, weed for his leg pain? Well, I'm for legalizing marijuana, not because I'm personally a user, but because I think it's a safer way to manage pain relief for many Americans. And it's less lethal than the opiates that unfortunately so many Americans have been addicted to. And don't get me, like, it pains me so much that the federal government turned a blind eye to Purdue Pharma while they were dispensing these millions of OxyContin prescriptions that then initiated this opiate plague. So I am for decriminalizing opiates for personal use so that people feel like they can actually come forward and seek treatment, not get referred to a prison cell. We need to do more to treat addiction and be realistic about it and not say it's like, oh, it's your fault. Because at this point, the government literally turned a blind eye while a private company made $20 billion off of the lives and blood of our fellow Americans. So that's what else. Sure, yeah, I guess we'll choose selfies after this, and math hat.
Hi. I'm personally a big fan of your comprehensive vision. It's clear that you're a visionary and you have an idea of what the country should look like in a perfect world. And I'm just wondering, hypothetically, say, you convince the rest of the world and we're all behind you, or not the world, the country, sorry, and we elect you and you're president.
Yeah.
Like, pragmatically speaking, with the system that we have of government, what is sort of your plan for how to approach that
I love this question so much.
And, work with what we've got and actually, prioritize things and get things done maybe at a
100%.
faster pace than we're used to.
I have thought about this so much. It's such a great question. Wait. So I went from totally anonymous to 4th, 5th, or 6th in various polls. I'm going to suggest that that's actually a harder leap to make than going from 4th to 1st. 4th to 1st happens all the time. Going from total anonymity to 4th is actually a little bit more difficult. So let's say the momentum keeps on growing. Thank you, New Hampshire. We win New Hampshire.
Yeah. That's right.
And the fun thing about being the person with low expectations is, can you imagine the headlines after I win this state? I'd be like, what just happened? Andrew Yang won New Hampshire. And then the momentum would be so unbelievable. So then we roll through Nevada, where we got a lot of fans there. And then South Carolina, then Super Tuesday, and then we go to the White House, and then we arrive. So a few things I want to make very, very clear. I am not the sort of person who says you can run the government like a business. Because they're different things. Very, very different structures and need different skills. Running the government is closer to what I did when I started and ran a national nonprofit, which is you present a vision, you generate energy and consensus around it, and you try and drive people in that direction. There's no command and control. You can't say just do that. You have thousands of different stakeholders. That's actually much more analogous to government. The second thing is, you would not want to have just a team of people that are new to Washington trying to make these things happen. You need to team people up with folks who know where the bodies are buried in Capitol Hill, have a bunch of relationships, know who to call, and you try and build a team that has a combination of both of these things. Now, I'm happy to say that the outside talent from Silicon Valley and other parts of our society are going to be there in my administration like gangbusters. Like, some of the most capable people in our country want to help make these changes. They see what's happening. So we need to team them up with the people that know how the organizations work and the bureaucracies to try and make lasting, sustainable change. When you talk about some of my bigger proposals, here's the fun part. Democrats want to beat Donald Trump so bad. They will be celebrating, you all will be celebrating that you took a bet on Andrew Yang and it worked and we won and we're like, wow, what's happening? So Democrats in the Congress will be so thrilled to work with me that we'll have a lot of momentum. Republicans in Congress are going to look up and say, wait a minute, how do I feel about this flagship proposal, the dividend? That benefits rural areas, red states on the interior, places that have gotten blasted by the automation of manufacturing jobs. Am I really against the dividend? And so then we can get the dividend across the finish line, because Alaska, the state that has a dividend, it's a Republican deep red state. Republicans don't hate economic freedom and autonomy for people. What Republicans and conservatives tend to dislike is giant bureaucracies making people's decisions top down. And I don't need 80% of Congress to pass the dividend, I just need a majority. It's just a standard bill. So after we get a dividend across the finish line, America will have this unfamiliar feeling where they'll say, wow, the government did it. The government did something I really like. It's real. I got the check, or I got the deposit in my account. Can you imagine that day? It's going to be like a national holiday. And then we're going to look around. Incidentally, I want to make Election Day a national holiday, and I want to make Tax Day a national holiday. I'm going to call it Revenue Day. Because if we're going to give hundreds of billions of dollars to our government, it shouldn't be a chore. We should have the day off. We should be celebrating another great year of our society and citizenship. So we'll have this energy where Republicans will say, wait a minute, even my constituents like this, and then we'll be able to come together to get some bipartisan things done, like infrastructure, which is historically very bipartisan. And one of the reasons why Republicans and others are crossing the aisle is that they sense that I'm non-ideological. I can work with anybody. I just want to solve the problems. And so I'm uniquely suited to be able to solve some of these problems in Washington, D.C., because people sense that I have nothing at stake. I've received not a dime of corporate PAC money. The $10 million we raised last quarter, 99% of it's small donors. Average donation, $30. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But this is a true uprising of the people. And that's how we're going to get things done. That's one reason why I don't come across as strictly partisan or ideological, because I'm not either of those things. We're going to end on that question. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all. We'd love to thank them both for taking pictures, but thank you all. If you continue your hand.
Dogs for Yang.
But he did say, oh my gosh, they're seriously going to bargain us the whole time. If it's not roosters, if it's not cows, if it's not rats, it's dogs.
Why is there always like...
Alright, you ready?
Yeah, really.
I'm serious right now. Because I can't... Every time we gotta record, somebody's gotta get the giggles.
So we can put it out tomorrow.
It needs to go out today.
Your face needs to go out today. Is your face ready for YouTube? I know, right? Why is there a chihuahua on me? What are we talking about? Hold on.
I've been sleeping for a long time.
Get your life together. Earlier today we were watching The Masked Singer. We had a recording of it. We were watching it. He really liked the eagle. But anyway, he points at the TV and he says, we need to yang that eagle. Are you yang exhausted right now?
Don't be yang exhausted. Look, this is up.
Yummy, 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 yummy.